The original run of the Amityville Book Series is considered to be from 1977 to 1991, comprising 10 books. Its unique blend of true crime and paranormal sewn together with the threads of fiction and marketed as based on true events has made it an alluring enigma. The quick hit summary of Amityville revolves around 112 Ocean Avenue, the Dutch colonial house that sits there in Amityville, New York on Long Island. According to the criminal convictions, in 1974, the elder son of the DeFeo family, Ronnie, murdered his entire family by shooting them while they slept. In the subsequent years of his defense, Ronnie has used a slew of excuses to deflect guilt, including blaming his sister, blaming it on drugs, and blaming it on evil spirits / the devil that possessed him. Within a year, by late 1975, the house was resold to George and Kathy Lutz, along with their 3 children. Because of its murderous past, the house was sold for well less than market value, for its locality being on the Great South Bay Canal leading out into the Atlantic Ocean in New York. Within the span of 28 days, the Lutz claimed to have been terrorized by malevolent spirits that galvanized them to flee. The hauntings of pig phantasms, swarms of flies, slamming doors, and other eldritch happenings. The following years, 1976 and 1977, the Lutzes consulted with numerous people in many fields, including parapsychology, investigative journalists, priests, and other clairvoyants, seeking answers to the strange terror. These interactions led the Lutz to believe that the house was haunted. Through these avenues, they linked up with Ronald DeFeo's defense attorney, William Webb. George and Kathy Lutz felt compelled to reach out to Ronnie DeFeo and hear about his experience, feeling there may be some credence to his possession story that led to the murders. The specifics of these meetings are ambiguous, that led to years of litigious arguments between the Lutzes and William Weber. Supposedly, the idea of the Amityville Horror as a book deal was conceived in these meetings. The conjecture I formulate is that the attorney, William Weber, sparked the idea of marketing their story and weaving it with elements of DeFeo's murders. Being a lawyer is being opportunistic and Machiavellian by nature. With access to Ronald DeFeo, he was the bridge that was able to facilitate the deal legality-wise. However, years later, George Lutz explained, while the deal fell through, because they learned that Ronald DeFeo would be receiving a percentage of the profits, and they didn't want to be associated with a convicted murderer and profiting off those murders. Due to Amityville's close proximity to New York City, the publishing capital of the U.S., they were perhaps more fortunate in securing a book deal on their own. That's when they linked up with Jay Anson, primarily a documentarian writer, steeped in the arts and publishing world of New York City since the 1930s as a teenager. On behalf of the Lutz family, a friend living in Englewood, New Jersey, approached Prentice Hall, a publisher, on how to publish the book. They recommended Tammy Mossman, an occult specialist, who involved friend Jay Anson. Anson says he spent several hours interviewing some cops from Amityville, the priest involved in blessing the house, and members from the Amityville Historical Society in research of the book. I'm unaware if anyone ever has posted the specifics of the contract that they had between them, but Wikipedia does mention that the Lutzes sold their story to Jay Anson, this being the 28 days spent on 112 Ocean Avenue. This also enabled him to make the film, The Amityville Horror, 2 years later in 1979, thus he became the primary beneficiary financially from it. Whenever badgered about avarice motives behind their exploitation of their haunting, George Lutz's common defense was they got hosed on the money distribution for the book and film, implying the amount of money made wasn't worth dragging the name into infamy. We only get a modicum of Anson's side of the story, the best source coming from Writer's Digest issue from March 1979. Anson believed the Lutz's story initially to be incredulous, until the more lurid and detailed the story got over time. Hours of tape recorded by the Lutz was included in the deal. Anson surmised that an ordinary couple like the Lutzes couldn't come up with such creative horror. Shortly after the agreement, Anson suffered a heart attack and wrote the book while in recovery, denoting it the Amityville Horror, inspired by the pulp title from H.P. Lovecraft, the Dunwich Horror. In a climate hungry for a great American haunting, the Amityville Horror went on to sell 155,000 hardcover copies, published by Prentice Hall, and globally millions of paperbacks over the next few years. Marketed as a true story, it brought with it intrigue as well as scrutiny. The book's prose is written like a chronicled journal, stiff and prosaic, with minimal analogies and adjectives, plus rife with basic errors on the geography and the town and buildings and dates. He's accepting of some of the minor errors made in the book, but says that doesn't poke holes or tarnish the validity of the ghost story at heart. Its greatest strength is its stern tone, which makes it somewhat believable, or at least wonder, especially exemplified in the prologue and epilogue of the book. When impugned by the critics, Anson was usually evasive when asked, and stood behind the creative license of a "I'm a writer" stance, and just a storyteller. Achieving global success, J. Anson reveled in the momentum of it, and had planned to write several more novels, seemingly horror. Attempting to cash in on the haunted house theme, Anson went on to publish 666 in 1980 from Pocket Books. Sadly, just as the horror paperback boom was taking off in the early 80s, J. Anson died at 58 from heart complications and was unable to publish the remaining planned books that he had beyond 666. This concludes part 1 of the Amityville Book Series. Next, they may have lost their ace writer, but there's more horror to tell. This has been a Pulp Arcanum segment from JBM.